Hey guys, I'm Becky from Bookbite Reviews, and today I'm talking about all the books that I read in the month of December. Now, if you have recently watched my January library haul / TBR, you know that I'm in the same clothes, the same hair, the same location as that video. I was gonna change, I just can't be bothered. So I did do a different angle. I am sitting in my lovely leopard print office chair. I've made slight improvements, so it's different. It's different. I did only read 9 books, which for me is on the lower side, and the lowest rating I had was a 4-star. So I picked some really good books. December, I feel like I learned a lot about myself and a lot about my booktube channel. December is when I decided that I'm no longer going to do stricter TBRs, that I'm going to just get a whole bunch of books and mood read each month, that I'm going to do library hauls instead of TBRs, and that I really need to just read for fun, read what I want, not force it. So that's what we're going into 2021 with. I will say that there are 2 books that I did DNF, but they're not a hard DNF. They're just a don't want to read right now. That's when I started to kind of have the realization that I'm putting a little bit too much pressure on my reading each month. So those books were Kingsbane, did not get finished. I've read, I think, a little over 100 pages. Enjoying it, but I'm just not feeling in the mood to read it right now. So that one has been put on pause, as well as Blood and Honey. I know. I want to wait until I can get my hands on the audiobook and see how I'm feeling, but I went in, I read like a chapter, and I'm just not feeling it. So now let's get into the books that I actually did read. So my one and only 4-star is Snow and Love. This is a wintry holiday romance bundle of 4 novellas. They are by Aimee Friedman, Nick Stone, Melissa De La Cruz, and Kasie West. Now, there were some stories that I enjoyed a lot more than others, but I think overall the entire collection was really good. I think if you are somebody who maybe needs a minute to get into the holiday spirit or are feeling a little bit blue, I think this is a good pick for you to pick up, since it's all like cutesy romance, one and dones, very short. I read it in basically one sitting, but I think it really picked up my mood and got me more into the holiday spirit. I didn't agree with how the placement was in this anthology. I think that it should have been slightly rearranged, but that could be a very personal preference of which one was my favorite, because my favorite was the very first book, so I wish that that was the last book. I think there was only one story that I just really didn't love, and that was Aimee Friedman's. I really enjoyed it, but I kind of felt like it was a little bit cheaply done, and that the romance that happens at the end, it felt a little fake and almost convenient, and I feel like kind of if any guy walked up to her at that moment that they would be in a relationship. So I didn't love that one, which is why I ended up giving this a 4-star instead of a 5-star. The other books I did enjoy. My favorite was definitely Kasie West, and that's all I think I have to say about this book. Just kidding, there is another 4-star I'm just now realizing, and that is Bonekeeper by Luca Veste. This book, it had a whole lot of things going on with it. I personally would suggest, if you're going to pick up this book, which I think you should, it was a good book, I gave it 4 stars, that you should read it physically. So I did listen to the audio of this book, and this book appears to be following a female detective who is hunting down the Bonekeeper, which is a local legend about this thing that lives in the woods and takes and kills people, and many people have gone missing over the years. Everyone has attributed it to the Bonekeeper, but they've always kind of like believed it's just a legend. But then a woman comes stumbling out of the woods, and she claims that the Bonekeeper did it to her. I thought that that is what this book was about, which it was, but we end up getting a whole lot of other perspectives, and it doesn't tell you like, okay, now it's the detective, now it's the Bonekeeper, now it's this person. You just have to use context clues of whose perspective you're reading, and there are more than one female, and I didn't realize that until the end. So I combined the two. At first it made sense, but then I was getting like more and more confused as it went on, because I was like, okay, how much stuff happened to her in her past? And then I realized that they are two different women. So I would highly suggest physically reading this so that you don't get lost and confused in all of the perspectives. But overall, I think it was good. I didn't give it a 5-star because, number one, I was very confused by the end. But that only would have knocked it like a 1/2 star because that was my own fault, not the book's fault. But the reason I knocked it for a star is the ending. It was odd. I didn't love it. I feel like it had an ending that was a bit kind of ridiculous, which is why I originally thought I didn't like thrillers, because I was reading thrillers that had this kind of ending and wasn't a fan. So for that, I decided to knock it a star. And also the ending was not realistic. It didn't have real world consequences for things, which is a big annoyance of mine. So now moving on to all of the 5 stars. I really don't know where to start with these 5 stars because they're all like really true good 5 stars, but I guess we will go ahead and start with Snowed In by Rachel Hawthorne. This is another book that I picked up to get into the holiday spirit. December was a month of either cozy holiday romance, high fantasy, or murder thrillers. So interesting bunch, but my top 3 favorite categories. So Snowed In is about a girl whose mom and dad get divorced. Her mom decides that she wants to start fresh, and she, on a whim, buys a B&B on what sounds like Mackinac Island here in Michigan in the middle of winter. And they're from California, I want to say. So very, very big change. And basically she meets this really hot boy for reasons that I won't get into. They can't be together, and then they end up getting snowed in together. So I read this book in one sitting. I did vlog about it, so be sure to check out my Christmas/New Year's vlog. And this book was so good. It definitely had its problems. I didn't love it in the beginning. I liked it in the beginning, but by the end I couldn't not give this book a 5-star. It just really was very cute and calming and was the perfect thing to read on a snowy day, and it was just an all-around good time. Next was Recommended for You by Laura Silverman. This book is about 2 Jewish teens who work in a local bookstore, and there is a holiday bonus up for grabs, and they're both competing to get it, but they are not friends. I really enjoyed this book. I felt like it really balanced well the funny lightheartedness as well as the romance with some very deep topics. There were times where I was laughing, there were times when I was crying, and I just really loved everything that this book brought up. I do wish that it talked a bit more about Hanukkah and Jewish traditions during the time, because it was something that I really wanted to get out of this book. It touches on something, so I think it's a really great starter book if you're starting to dive into more diverse books and learn about different cultures. But for me, I would have liked a whole lot more. But overall, this book was really cute, really well done. I loved it from start to finish. I will say that the love interest I was not a fan of in the beginning. I was like, no, we don't need this. But he does have a very redeeming moment where they end up having a heart-to-heart. And I thought that was a really cool and healthy way to do it, of them kind of being put in a situation where they're around each other and kind of just hashing it out and being like, this is what's going on in my life, this is what's going on in my life, and getting through it, instead of just and then one day he was super nice to me and we fell in love. So I did really respect it for that. Next is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. This is another adult thriller. This one follows a girl who, when she was younger, went to a summer camp and her 3 bunkmates went missing. No one has heard from them, and her whole life she has dealt with this guilt of how she could have prevented it from happening and how she is to blame. And now she is an adult, she's a painter, she's still haunted by this experience, and she's invited by the camp owner, who is going to reopen the camp, to come and be a art teacher. So we slowly figure out her experiences. It goes back and forth between present and the past of what happened. It was intense, and it was a lot, and a lot of things happen, and this was such a good book. I really love Riley Sager, and I had a really good time with this book. I felt, with how thrilling it is, I kept thinking that the book took place in winter when it definitely doesn't. It takes place during the summer, but from how dark it is, it feels like a winter book. So if you're looking for some winter thrillers, I would pick this up, even though technically it's a summer thriller, but still great. Next is Invisible Girl by Lisa Jewell, another one of my all-time adult thriller favorites. This book is one which Lisa Jewell does this all the time. In all the books I've read by her, it does this, which is multi-POV. However, the big difference between this and The Bone Keeper is that this one is clearly labeled, and the audiobook has multiple narrators so that you do have a different voice for each character. So spot on. I always listen to Lisa Jewell on audio. This book is, it's very complicated to explain this book. This is like the third or fourth time I've tried to explain this book, and it never gets any easier. But basically, we have a whole cast of characters who have some kind of thread, which is pretty loose, but something that ties them all together. And we go through all of their perspectives to find out what happened in this small town. So one is a teacher who has been suspended because they believe he's had an inappropriate relationship with a student or multiple students. Next is the people that live across the street. So we get the mother's point of view. Her husband is a child psychologist. So the third point of view that we get is a ex-patient of his. So we have these three people who are very loosely tied together, but all live in this community and have something to do with one another. Our ex-patient, who is a teen, is stalking her ex-psychologist. The mom is very concerned about this girl as well as what's going on in her family. And then we have the neighbor who, through different things going on, interacts with both of these characters in very different ways. So within the community, we have somebody who has been sexually assaulting women in like broad daylight. And then our teen ends up going missing. So we have all this going on, all these multi-points of view, many different threads, all slightly related, and in true Lisa Jewell fashion, this book is intense, it is gripping, it is so obsessive, and I loved it. I also really, really loved that the ending is one just like with Family Upstairs, or is that what that book was called? But just like that book, this book has an ending where somebody that you suspected of being the bad guy ends up not being the bad guy, but then you find something out about them that makes you wonder if they are guilty of something else. So I really loved that. Fantastic book. Read all of Lisa Jewell's books. Next is a book that I'm so happy that I finally read and gave it 5 stars, and that is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. Yes, I have finally read this book, and it was so good, you guys. I really, really enjoyed this. I read this book so quickly. I was reading like 100 to 150 pages an hour, which is like triple the amount that I normally read, and it was just so well done. I'm really excited to continue on, but I'm also extremely nervous at the same time because I have read some reviews of book 2 saying that it was a disappointment, and I don't like that, especially when everyone loved the first one. So a little nervous, but I'm still going to continue on with the series. I don't know when, but hopefully I still enjoy it enough to continue to the last book. And then finally, my favorite book of the month. I know that I said that there were 9 books and I've only talked about 8, but I couldn't mention this book without talking about the other one because one is my all-time favorite and one takes place after that book. So it would have been too obvious what my favorite book of the month was. So my favorite book of the month was A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. The other book I have not talked about is A Court of Frost and Starlight. Both of these books have gotten 5 stars. I loved them, but my number 1 book of the month is definitely A Court of Wings and Ruin. This was another book that I read extremely quickly. I think this book is almost 700 pages, but honestly, it's probably closer to like 8 because the font was very small, the pages were very thin. It was a very large book, but I ended up reading it in like 3 days. It was amazing. I loved it. I I read this book and then was starting to feel slightly slumpy as well as just very, very hangovery. So I decided to go ahead and pick up A Court of Frost and Starlight, even though I had plans to wait until January to read that book. It was also amazing. I will say a lot of people have hated A Court of Frost and Starlight, and I get why. I totally get why. If I would have read it when it came out, I would have also been like, what the hell is this? But going in knowing what it was, knowing that nothing's going to happen, there's no plot progression, it's all just character driven randomness of them buying gifts for each other and dealing with their grief. Knowing that going in, it totally changed my perspective on the book, and I loved it. Since finishing these books, I have been dealing with a book slump for a long time. I finally, now that it's January, have gotten out of it, but that's why there are only 9 books on this list, because I was just feeling so hungover about this series. February needs to get here much sooner because I need the 4th book in my hands ASAP. But alright guys, those are all the books that I read this month. Definitely be sure to leave a comment telling me what your favorite book that you read this month was. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, to please give it a thumbs up. Keep reading, stay safe, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!